Welcome to episode 25 of 100 Years of Marine Corps Tankers, a station dedicated to honoring the legacy of Marine tankers and remembering the stories of what made the community special, told through those words of the Marines that towed the line. We are joined today by a Marine that has covered the spectrum of duty stations, both active and reserve, a combat veteran who has a very interesting deployment story to tell. Welcome to the channel, Gunnery Sergeant Alan Kamper.
Thank you.
So going back to 1994 and before, what led up to you wanting to become a Marine?
I had friends. I was in a junior ROTC in high school, and I had friends that had joined the Marine Corps. I went and saw them graduate, and I was actually enlisted into the Navy's delayed entry program, and I decided to leave that and join the Marine Corps, much to the dismay of the Navy recruiter. But it was something about seeing them graduate at boot camp that it just, yeah.
Nice. And that leads us up to February of 1994, where you graduated in May of 1994, attending MCRD Paris Island. So you're obviously an East Coast Marine. Where was home for you at that time?
I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and so that's what I call home. I was born in Florida, but I was so young when we moved that I call North Carolina home.
Did you know in May of 1994 that you wanted to be a tanker?
It was interesting. Yes. When I was in the Marine Corps delayed entry program, the recruiter, I had not picked an MOS, and the recruiter wanted me to pick an MOS. He's like, "Man, you got to do this today." And oddly, it's one of the times in life that I considered a divine intervention, because I prayed about it the night before. And I went in and I started flipping the catalog, and I flipped to a page, and there's an M60 with a tank commander and a loader sitting out of the hatch, probably in Camp Lejeune. I don't know, but because it was wooded. Mm-hmm. And man, immediately I said, I want to do that. I just stuck my finger in the middle of the page. I said, I want to do that. And fortunately I went to that. I went UNC. No, I did not go UNC in swim qual in boot camp because I wouldn't have made it through. Mm-hmm. But I got like the lowest swim qual. So I attribute that to maybe being put into tanks instead of Amtrak's.
Roger.
Because it was 1800 field.
And then January 95, you graduated as a tank crewman and were sent out to 2nd Tank's Charlie Company, where you served in the 3rd Platoon and remained there for 3 years. What were some of your early impressions of the fleet after getting out of tank school?
It was very, I want to say cutthroat. It was just characters in Charlie Company. And even 3rd Platoon, but very salty lance corporals and corporals who've been there for, years. At the time, corporals were getting kicked out of the Marine Corps at 8 years because they hadn't promoted, because there was just no movement in tanks in 95. And I think maybe that came back around later, but it relieved itself early on too, because I got promoted to staff sergeant while on active duty and close to the, I think, 6-year mark. Okay. Because a few master guns got out. But when I first got to the fleet, it was just this salty group of tankers that I learned from and cut my teeth on.
By cutting your teeth, you served as the driver, loader, gunner, and tank commander, and then also as a section leader. So you kind of ran the gamut on the enlisted billets there. And some of the notes here say that you did multiple training deployments to Fort Pickett, Virginia, and 29 Palms. And I know those were actually deployments. Those really weren't short stints. So what are some of the memories from those operations?
At Fort Pickett, my biggest memories were probably the cold, and then the off time, the shenanigans that went on in the off time. In that time period, if you talk to any of those guys that were in around that time, there was a lot of shenanigans going on up in Fort Pickett. Some of the things that stood out is in my last deployment at Fort Pickett, I took a tank on a C-17 where there was a tank that had left like 2 days prior to us, and then 2 more tanks, me and another tank, and we all loaded on C-17. So that was a really neat experience. When we landed in, where was it? New River. And then we got off the C-17 in New River, and we got on a piece of a bridge, the inflate or the pontoon bridges that they put together, and then they strap the boats and make it a barge. Mm-hmm. So we barged across New River and landed in French Creek, and it was just the whole experience was just like this really neat experience to get to do as a tanker.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the essence of getting those tanks in. Obviously, you have to fly them in one at a time and then barge them over one at a time. But yeah, that is a very cool experience. But what about 29 Palms? Were you guys running CACs then?
Yeah, we went down to CAX, and it was always my biggest thing. It was like a family reunion when you went down there, because these were the guys that you knew in tank school, and there was no what do they call it, the EAP,
Hmm.
to draw tanks from. We would draw tanks from a company out there, which, there's always a little bit of headbutting. You got tankers that are giving up their tank, a whole company's worth of tanks, for a month or 2 months. And then when you turn them back in, they're like, hey, wait, this is broken. This is broken. Where's this? And where's, and they wanted to make sure that accountability. And I would have felt the same, because you build an attachment to that vehicle when you're on it. I think it's like nothing else I've experienced since. So that was always interesting, but it was always like a family reunion too, because you got to see the guys you went to tank school with. And as you grew up through it, you got to see that.
And then in 1997, obviously the Marine Corps made a very poor decision sending tankers to New York City for Fleet Week. And I'm sure there's a heck of a lot of stories to tell during that week, because that is certainly the dream of any enlisted Marine to be selected to go to that experience. So what are some of the PG or even PG-13 stories that you're able to tell?
Oh man, Fleet Week was so much fun. I went up as a tank commander, and I took, it wasn't my crew. I took a Marine from, I think, 1st Platoon, and a Marine from 2nd Platoon. And then we took a mechanic. And it was a fun time. On the way up, we LCAC'd, we LCAC'd off of Onslow Beach. We stopped in Dam Neck, Virginia, or Little Creek, and we stayed a night or two on the LCAC ramp before we loaded onto another ship on the Wasp to go up to New York. It was, and this is before September 11th. So I never did go to the Twin Towers. I wish I had. But it was just it was long work days where you had all these people coming on the boat, and you're doing this big dog and pony, and you're answering the same questions all day long. But the tank is the cleanest it's ever been. That was a fun time though. I ended up meeting the mother of my kid now, so that there's a memory from it there, I guess. It kind of spawned that, so to speak. So my daughter at least has some kind of root in my Marine Corps history, because I wouldn't have ever met her mom had I not been up there for Fleet Week.
April 98 and then into October 2001. This is where you were promoted to staff sergeant. You served at the Marine Corps detachment, Fort Knox. This is where they make Marines, or made Marines at the time before we moved to Benning. There you were the tank crewman instructor, so you were TCI, platoon sergeant, and then interestingly enough, you were the mobile training team lead for the AVLB, which we're going to talk about that in a second. And also you were over at the Armor Officer Basic Course as an instructor. So that is once again ran the gamut of available billets at the detachment. So obviously getting promoted to staff sergeant, shortly after that, I think, or certainly around that time, 9/11 happened. So what was it like being at Knox during that whole time frame?
It was a good time. I was there for 4 years. I ended up leaving active duty from there, and I made that decision right before September 11th. And then I was actually on terminal leave when September 11th occurred. I had already decided to go into the SMCR, so I was already transitioning out that way. And so I wasn't actually, I was checking out that day, or I was actually driving. I was going to go live down in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was driving down that day, and I had, of course, all sorts of good friends. There's that the tank school documentary was happening at the time. So when I've watched that in the past, I mean, I know all those guys. We were all, drinking buddies and work colleagues. So it was an interesting time, I guess. Prior to that, those 4 years prior, it was a good time. It was kind of bookended by September 11th, and then when I first got there as an instructor, it was there was a hazing incident with that was like nationalized, that occurred at Fort Knox. So that happened right at the beginning of that. So there's a lot of scrutiny on how we taught Marines, but I did I don't know, a year or two down at the tank ramp teaching the students, and then a couple of years as a platoon sergeant doing classroom stuff. I enjoyed it. I probably enjoyed the troop handling platoon sergeant part more than being on the tank, but both of them were great. But you just developed personal relationships with more of the Marines as a platoon sergeant.
What about working with the AVLB? Because I don't know many people that actually have had that experience.
Yeah, that was interesting because I had not touched or seen I'd seen the AVLB, but I never got to work on that when I was at Second Tanks. So we put together a training team, and I kind of, learned as I went. And so for some of the older guys, it was like it's like a giant toy. You got all these hydraulics, and it's everything in it is so archaic compared to an M1. And but then of course you got all the older guys like, oh, the M60 is a man's tank, and it certainly, there's a lot. It's just different. It's archaic, so to speak. You had the hatch down in the bottom, and you had all this 115 gallons of FRH. I think that if you didn't get the quick disconnects on the bridge hooked up just right, it just starts dumping out, and you're digging holes to clean it up. But when it worked, it was fun because it was just something that was out of the ordinary. And then we went to first tanks, we went to second tanks, and we trained Marines on it. We also did a training evolution in Fort Knox with one of the reserve units that was there for their AT. So we taught reservists on it. It was a neat piece of equipment to mess around with.
And then, like you'd mentioned before, you left active duty to go to the MCR, and having some reservists that have already done some interviews. And obviously I've been in I&I, so I know a lot of reservists. I know that that's a challenging billet and challenging duty, because as I've already mentioned, the reservists have exactly the same annual requirements and training requirements that do the active duty. And they got about a 16th of the time in which to do that. So having gone from active duty to reserve, how was that experience for you during that transitional period?
It was interesting because when you're on duty, you almost do nothing but bash the reservists. They don't know what they're doing. And then you get there. For me, it was an extremely unique experience because these are also the guys I went to war with. But when I got there, you got 16 guys in the platoon, so 15 guys under me. I was a platoon commander because we didn't have an officer in that platoon. And not only was I now their platoon commander, but I was also their instructor for about 80% of them. I was their instructor in tank school in some form or fashion, either as a troop leader, platoon sergeant, or as a TCI down on the tank ramp. So it was neat because I kind of raised these guys from pups, so to speak. So that was a really unique experience. I was really blessed with Staff Sergeant Philip Kowski at the time. He was an active reserve Marine, so he'd been around a while, and he was also in tanks the whole time. So he had a good breadth of experience. Master Sergeant now, retired Sam Swain. He came there shortly after I got there as an I&I, and he deployed with us to Iraq. So I was really blessed with some of these guys that had been around. There was I think he retired as a Sergeant Major, Greg Wright. He was there. He was an active reserve Marine in tanks the entire time, at that unit the entire time. I think Philip Kowski came from Rochester originally, or Syracuse, but guys who'd been in tanks for a while. So that was really neat and refreshing. And then you get these Marines that they don't do this all the time. So they don't know the tank part like an active duty Marine. But these are guys that go out and they work an actual job. Not that being in the Marine Corps is not an actual job, but there's a huge difference between an 18 or 19-year-old that is a Lance Corporal on Camp Lejeune or 29 Palms versus that 19 or 20-year-old that is now married and supporting a wife with a job, and he's carving out, you say a weekend a month, but he's carving out time out of his schedule to be in tank. So doesn't have the proficiency, but he's certainly got far more maturity. And when you tell him to do something, hey, and then they're bringing in experience from the outside world,
Right.
that it just, you know, it's just different. And if you were I&I, so you know,
Yep.
and sure, it's tough to, you know, be a Marine doing that on the proficiency side as a tanker. But then we would do like 7-8 drillers so that we could, you know, we'd be out there for 4 days. Not too many people realize that a reservist might not just have that weekend. He might have the equivalent of 2 weekends, because he's doing an 8 or 9 driller to go do gunnery.
Right.
And then he doesn't come back for 2 months, and he doesn't, you know, he's losing that proficiency, but he's still got to maintain it. You know?
Well, by the way, they're doing annual training as well, which could be another week in the summertime. So yeah, I mean, it's not 1 week in a month. I learned that very quickly, and I've made the comment publicly, and I'll say it till the day I'm no longer here, that I could not do what the reservists do. That job is incredibly difficult, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't switch my brain like that. And from Monday to Friday, have a job to worry about, and then on Friday turn around and all of a sudden have to worry about another job. That's incredible. And you did that for the first time from October 2001 through July 2004 with 8th Tank Battalion as part of Alpha Company 3rd Platoon. And like you already mentioned, you were a platoon commander. During this time, you deployed to Iraq with Task Force Tarawa. And you'd mentioned that the date, March 23rd, 2003, is a very influential and very memorable date for you because of the fighting that you did in Al Nazariya. Are you able to kind of elaborate on that and kind of set the stage for us?
Yeah, so we knew that going into it. So it was, the cool part is it was this like quintessential Marine Corps experience that I might not have gotten on active duty. I surely would have deployed had I stayed on active duty. I would have been somewhere in Iraq in 2003. But I sailed over, we landed our tanks. The whole time we knew our mission was Nazariya. So we were wargaming this completely on ship. We would do sand tables on ship, but every couple days we're up there doing these sand tables and all these contingencies. And then as war kicks off, we, you know, cross the line of departure. I got to be the first tank in Task Force Tarawa to cross over. The LAVs went over and they told us it was this big tank berm, and we get up there and they're cutting it down with a armored combat engineer vehicle. And it was literally like 6 feet tall. And I mean, I could have driven over this. I'm like, what are we waiting for? And but we waited there for hours while this little ace dug this little lane for us, and we all pushed through. We had a day or two as we crossed up through the desert. And then the night before Nazariya, I had a shortwave radio with me, and I'm listening to it. And the BBC was reporting that Nazariya was secure. And so I was on fire watch. I took one of the late fire watches so the crew could sleep. And here I was, well, son of a bitch, you know, Nazariya secure. That's the whole reason we're here is to, you know, capture and secure the lane in Nazariya as a secondary approach to the north. And so I'm thinking to myself, I was like, well, I guess we're not going to do anything. And then the next morning, as we start pressing up there, it was a 507th Maintenance. That was an Army unit that had taken a wrong turn, and they went through Nazariya, and then they turned back around and came back through. And then the Fedayeen militia attacked them, and that's what started the fight in Nazariya. As we were approaching that, they were coming out. So that made for an interesting day. And
that whole scenario sounds very similar to, I think, the PFC Jessica Lynch story with Task Force. Is that related to that event?
Yes. And so she was part of the 507th Maintenance. There was another female, Lori Piesawa. I think she was a PFC as well. That unit, so as we start pressing through, we started taking fire from a little village just south of Nazariya, and we start returning fire. And then there's a lull in the fire, and all of a sudden there's a 5-ton truck and a Humvee coming our way. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, did we just shoot up friendly vehicles?
Mm.
And we had not, but their trucks are smoking, there's bullet holes in them, and they pull up to our company commander's tank, and he hops out, and then the trucks, continue on. Well, it was the captain of the 507th Maintenance, so the company commander of the 507th Maintenance, and the remnants of it. And there were still more soldiers that were forward of that. So we started pressing forward. There was a garbage dump south of the city. There were a few there that I pulled up my tank, and I saw some there, and we got an Amtrak for them to get out of there. And then we started waiting, basically for a package to be worked up. The Cobras started coming in, and we started working our way into the city. Well, Jessica Lynch and the Humvee that she was in had rear-ended a Dragon Wagon, one of those LVTs or LVS, I guess LVS. And she had been pulled out of it. So she wasn't even there when we passed by it. I remember seeing that truck because I looked over to my left and we're going up the road. I was like, man, we're getting all this small arms fire from the tree line. And I'm thinking to myself, man, somebody got hurt in that, but I didn't see any bodies in it. Because I mean, it was just like if you were on a highway today and you saw a car rammed up the back end of a semi, right, and it was just a Humvee. And so we continued to press in, and second platoon had gotten up in there and they had gotten stuck. So the company then sent us, as third platoon, sent us through. We get over the, I think it's the Euphrates and then the Saddam Canals on the north side of town. And the whole time we war gamed this, we called this Ambush Alley. And because there was two thoroughfares through Nasiriyah, the one on the east and the one on the west. The one on the west they called Sniper Alley. The one on the east was Ambush Alley. And we started working our way through there and trying to get the second platoon. Eventually we get down through there. My tank has an NBC fire. I've got to shut it down. My platoon commander, because I'd gotten a platoon commander about 2 weeks prior to the war kicking off, he came and was assigned to us, a captain, Romeo Kubis at the time. He's still in. And his tank got stuck in what basically was a cesspool. It just, very deep mud that was just the result of all the sewage pipes of all the little houses around running right into the middle of the street. So he got stuck. We had to get him out. Eventually we got him out. The M88s that tried to come in, they were trying to, they were leapfrogging. One would get stuck, the other one would pull it out. That one would get stuck. The one that just got unstuck would pull it out. They ended up leaving an 88 there overnight because we were attached to 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, and the battalion commander said, get out. We're just leave the vehicle. So the Marines left. Basically, they were trying to get out quick. So they locked up the vehicle. But by the next morning, when they got back to the vehicle, there was an Iraqi lady dragging off the sling for the power pack to take the power packs out of the tank, because it's just pure aluminum, and she's just dragging it off by the chain. And I think they might have gotten that back. We ended up getting, those were two brand new Hercs. Those were the I forget the designation, the E3 or something like that, M88 E3 or something. Right. But they were with the armor on the sides and the upgraded engine and all that could keep up with us. And then we ended up getting this old Army Herc that was just a straight, OG Herc, so to speak, that couldn't keep up with us. But and that was a little bit later on. But we got unstuck. We got out. 2nd platoon got out. The Herc was the only vehicle that had to stay. But as we got out, there was a big friendly fire incident in Nasiriyah with a A-10 that had shot up the Marines and some of the Amtraks north of the Saddam Canal. We pushed north of that, and then we set up security overnight. So that was that day. Now, all this time, about a week later, is when the rescue mission to get Jessica Lynch kicked off, and we were part of that.
And how did that go down? I mean, did you guys shift mission at that point? It became a straight recovery mission, and you were pulling security for those guys, or how did that whole thing kind of come?
Yeah, want to say, I forget the exact date, but it was about a week later. It was April 2nd or April 7th or something like that. So the Task Force 20 guys approached us, and they wanted our tank platoon to escort their convoy down. So we get word of this, and we're like, oh, okay. And then these guys start showing up at around dusk. We're preparing for this all day, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, that whole western side of the city we haven't been on. The whole week we've been here, we've been essentially guarding any exit to the city and not really letting anybody out. So all the roads are blocked. We've got, I want to say it was 3-2, maybe 2-1 LAR. They're all south of the city. 10th Marines is down there. You've got 1-2 on the north side of the city. And we had 2nd Platoon from Alpha Company 8th Tanks. They acted as part of the QRF with some of the Amtraks, and I believe it was a Ranger company. Don't quote me there. That might have been either trucked up or in the Amtraks, and they were going to come in with 2nd Platoon if needed. So all these high-speed vehicles start showing up, and we get out and we start talking to this major who was the head of the Rangers. And I had the opportunity to work with special ops guys before, but obviously not in country. So it was kind of interesting to be part of that and talk to these guys. And, they never came out of role, so to speak. That, he's talking to us in NVGs, but I'm 2 feet away from him in moonlight that I probably could have seen, but he's, continually adjusting his NVGs, and we're going over the plan. And what was a cool part is that some of the Navy SEALs had come out, and they wanted to look at the vehicle. They were just as intrigued by the tanks as we were by some of the vehicles that they had. And of course, they had these little armored vehicles that looked like LAVs, but they weren't. They were Pandors. They were a 6-wheel instead of an 8-wheel. And of course, being an armored guy, I'm like, oh, what is that? I want to know what that is.
Right.
And so, oh yeah, we just got them recently. We just started using them. And so it was something that was totally new to them, but it was cool that they wanted to come and check out the tank. And, here we're, oh, wow, you guys are so high speed. They're like, oh man, this is really cool. Look at your tank and tell us about this, tell us about that. So it was really interesting to get that interaction with those guys and then to watch them work. So that later that night, we had blocked the bridge on the northwest side of town, so no one could get out. So I had a mine plow on my tank, even though I was platoon sergeant, because the 3 tank, the plow tank, had one of those. I guess it was a British mine plow, but a big, huge mine plow that was on it. And so we took the original plow off that one and put it on my tank. So we had the 2 plows. Well, the problem with that is that you can't run over vehicles with a plow because it just sticks into the side of the vehicle. So, but what you could do is you could poke a vehicle and you could drive it around and use it to make roadblocks, which is what we did. So I was a lead tank that night because I had the plow and I needed to clear the path on the bridge. So we pressed forward it was about a mile away. So we left line, the line of troops, and we pressed forward in the tank, completely blacked out. We start moving this, I think it was a BMW, and we start pushing it across the bridge really slowly. At the same time, 110 and everybody else on the southeastern side of the city are doing a feint. So the whole sky starts to light up like this giant fireworks show on the southeast side of town as a diversion. And I get the car off to the other side of the bridge and pull off back out of it. And then the convoy of special ops vehicles starts rolling down as Rangers and SEALs. And, you can see aircraft in the air and little birds. And it was far bigger of an operation than I understood at the time. And then I learned later on, like, just how much support was going into this operation. And so we get down to the Saddam Hospital that's on the west side of town. And we had satellite photos of it and all this stuff when we did our brief, and we set the 3 tanks. One of our tanks it was one with a giant plow had died on the march up. So the engine died and it was now back with the log train. So we're a 3 tank platoon at this point. And we set up in 3 different locations and provide security to the hospital while the special ops guys are assaulting and going into the hospital. And we were there for like 3 hours, but these guys with her were out in like 15 or 20 minutes when I learned after the fact. But then there was we were looking for bodies of the other soldiers that she was with.
Hmm.
We ended up finding those. It was actually Staff Sergeant Filipkowski's tank, because he was my platoon, or I was a platoon sergeant because we got a platoon commander, and he had went down a section leader, but he was basically the wingman. And so we're down there, and
How did he find them?
yeah, he was looking around and he saw mounds, and he's like, hey, and he told the Rangers, hey, I've got some mounds over here. And they start digging by hand, and he hands them the shovel out of the Sponson box, and they start digging, and they found the bodies in shallow graves that were just basically on the grounds of the hospital. And so they got the bodies out, put them in the trucks, and then we all rolled out. It was dawn by the time we got back to friendly lines. So this happened, it was an all night affair. We were there for 3 or 4 hours. It was, happened in the wee hours of the night, but to see all those pieces come together. But we didn't really know the gravity of what we were doing at the time. We didn't know how publicized it had become. Now, I mean, if you mention it now, no one remembers it. It's kind of a side note, but at least at the time, it was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I know for a long time, Jessica Lynch was a household name.
Yeah.
I think that's showing our age a little bit, but I mean, yeah, that was definitely something that certainly back here in the States was highly publicized, and it's phenomenal that you were part of that. Yeah, I had no idea. That's really interesting. But the story doesn't end there, because you left the SMCR in July of 2004, and obviously you're a person of character, and a person that has the desire, the need, and the want to continue to serve this nation and serve those folks that you live around. And you continue to do that as part of the Customs and Border Patrol. What similarities does being a CBD, or what do you guys say, CBP, and a U.S. Marine have in common? I'm sure there's some commonalities.
I mean, it's law enforcement. So there's always, all law enforcement agencies are pretty much paramilitary organizations. That's how they're set up. So the interesting thing is, I work for Air and Marine Operations. So after I left active duty, but while I was a reservist, I started flight training out of college. I ended up carrying that through, and now I've been flying since 2002, professionally since 2006, and I've been with CBP since about 2009. It's similar, especially when you're talking about aircraft, because you've got air crew. Most of these guys, because they're former pilots, a lot of former pilots are former military. So it's almost like a giant joint task force, so to speak, because you've got guys from every branch. We've got guys that were enlisted. We've got guys that were officers. So there's similarities there. Wear a uniform. It's just the depending. I think the biggest similarity is the dependence and trust you have to have with the guys you're working with. I haven't done a whole lot of work in the civilian world. After I left the Marine Corps, I kind of gravitated back to this soon after. I don't know if you see that level of trust in the civilian world, but you definitely do in law enforcement. You definitely do in aviation, and it kind of puts all those together. So I'd say that's a similarity.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to also thank your fellow officers, because I mean, obviously that is a very difficult job, and it's not going to get any easier. And there's obviously it's been highlighted in the news quite a bit, and so thank you for what you guys do. Certainly, that's a very proud job. I mean, that's Marine reservist, and then CBD. I mean, that's a heck of a career, and the divestment certainly does not get any easier for somebody like yourself. That's you haven't worn the Marine Corps cloth necessarily for some time, but you still very proudly call yourself a tanker, and you always will. And I know that word coming down affected you guys as much as it affected us. They're still in. What is your message to the community post this divestment?
Oh man, I don't know a message. It hit me hard. I've been because I was at Fort Knox at the time I was there. There were two of us, me and Staff Sergeant Vasquez, that both left at about the same time. But most of our peers that were instructors there stayed in and did careers. And A lot of them are names that when I was watching one of your episodes before, that folks call legends. There's Willenbecker and Upton and Benitez, and there's all these guys that were there that stayed in, and I was able to stay in touch with them. So I feel like I've been lurking in the community for some time because I was at Charlie Company's decommissioning way back when it decommissioned a few years ago, and then it recommissioned, and then it decommissioned again. I missed that one. I watched the videos of the tanks leaving. I wanted to go there and be there for that. I had a work trip recently. It was March of this year, and I went down and I saw Master Guns Heath down at the tank school. I had never been to Benning before, but work was down in Benning that day, and I broke away and got to see the tank school. And he had broken the news to me. He's like, "Yeah, we're probably getting rid of tanks. It's probably happening in about 2 weeks." Sure enough, about 2 weeks later, phone starts ringing off the hook, and it was tough. It's such a. Sometimes I consider myself a tanker far more than I consider myself a Marine. There's just something special about it, and the teamwork that goes into it. Guys that I work with now that are pilots have asked me, they say, "Well, what do you like better?" And I was like, "Man, tanks is the best job I ever had." And it's not just because I heard that in a movie. I was saying that long before Fury came out. And when I explained it to them, so when you're flying an airplane, you've got ailerons and rudder, and you've got elevator, and you've got power for whatever engine you've got. In a tank, it would be like being in an airplane, and there's 4 people. Each one has one of those controls, and they're making that happen. So the synergy that you develop in a tank crew there's nothing like it. It's a drug of sorts, because there's nothing like it. I guess a message would be that we're all still brothers, and we're all still here. We share something that no one else is going to get to share after this. Sadly, the Army does, but they're on such a much bigger scale when it comes to armor. I'm sure that they have that esprit de corps, but not like we do. It's an esprit de corps inside of the esprit de corps of the Marine Corps, because we're so unique. In 2018, I was with a Black Hawk helicopter crew in North Carolina for Hurricane Florence, and we did recovery operations, rescue operations down in the eastern part of North Carolina around Camp Lejeune. So I hit everybody up that I could, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to go fly over your house, and everything okay?" And before I could get in touch with him, I flew over I think he got a Master Sergeant, Chris Jules.
Yep, Gunny. He got as a Gunny, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I promoted him.
Absolutely, he deserves it.
But he pinned on my corporals, my freaking blood stripes, and he was there in that formation when I got promoted to corporal, and he was a sergeant, and I've known him for years and years. And I had his address, and I flew over the house, and there he was outside just looking at stuff, and I waved down, and then I messaged him later. I was like, "Hey, that was me in the Black Hawk." "Oh my gosh, you're kidding me." And so it's like that's the message, that this bond, I'm sure other MOSs, I'm sure other services, I'm sure other Marines have this bond, but there was just something about being a tanker, because it was so small. I talked about going to First Tanks and having to use their tanks, but it was like a family reunion. And then it was a family argument when you turned it back in,
right.
All busted up, right. And now they've got to do all this work. But I think that's the best part of being a tanker, is this, especially a Marine Corps tanker. There's books now, a number of books on Marine tankers in Okinawa or Tarawa and all these places in Vietnam. I took a firearms course from the late Pat Rogers, who was a Marine, and he was a tanker. And sure enough, he was in that book, and we talked tank stuff years before. He was a tanker in Vietnam, and I was taking this course from him like 8 or 9 years ago, and we were talking tanks, and it was this bond that we had. It's the bond. That's the message. That's the gift that we were all given when we were tankers, is the bond that we have with one another.
I agree, and I've had a similar experience being down in Benning with Vietnam Tankers Association. And when you sit down with those guys, I mean, a tanker's a tanker. A Marine Corps tanker is a Marine Corps tanker, and
Yeah.
and I agree with you. It is a certain lineage inside of a community that is, you know, to be very proud of. So yeah, great analogy, great way of putting that. Especially breaking it down from the from the airframe to the tank. I've never really considered it like that, but yeah, each one of those individuals is doing a very specific job, and without that person, you're obviously degraded, and sometimes you can't even operate. So no, that's a great breakdown. I got to thank the channel. I got to thank the subscribers that have continued to support the channel, and those that continue to support us each week. Please, if you haven't done so, or, please do press the subscribe button and notification bell, and then thumbs up, thumbs down. Please let me know how we're doing and things we can improve. You can always reach out to me for interviews. Everyone's got a story, especially folks like Gunny Kamper. And thank you so much for coming on. I know you're a very busy man. This was a hard interview to pin down between your schedule. We did it, and fantastic stories. I had no idea about the Jessica Lynch piece, and absolutely phenomenal career. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your continued service protecting this nation. And with that, I'll give you the floor for closing comments.
Yeah, JR, thank you for putting this together. It was Top E-Step that had called me. Hey, do you want to do this? I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. He's like, I'm not going to do it, but I guess he did finally do it.
I pulled him in. I tricked him into it.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough. I got to sit down and watch the channel because it sounds like a bunch of my brothers have already talked to you, and it's a neat way to hear their story and see them and see where they're at nowadays. But yeah, it's a great thing that you've done. I really appreciate it because it's something that we're losing it, and it's heartbreaking. Hopefully I'm at the decommissionings. If I hear about them in enough time, I'll get there. And I'm sure we'll meet again at some point because I'm sure there'll be reunions at least for the next 5 or 10 years.
Absolutely.
Until they got to shut down the Marine Corps Tankers Association. But we got a good maybe 50 or 60 years before that happens.
Right.
So.
No, I thank you, my friend. And with that, we'll sign off and Semper Fi.
All right, Semper Fi. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.